Lorenzo Moretti held the city of Chicago in the palm of his hand. He was a man who commanded armies, fearing nothing and owning everyone. On the eve of a strategic marriage that would cement his empire, a single red light shattered his carefully constructed reality. Through the rain-slicked window of his armored Maybach, he saw the ghost of his past. Sophie, the woman he had ruthlessly discarded years ago for the sake of the family. But she wasn't alone. Clinging to her hands were two children, a boy and a girl, with his dark eyes and his defiant jawline. In that heartbeat, the strategic alliance didn't matter. The engagement ring didn't matter. Only they mattered. Lorenzo was about to tear the city apart to claim what was his, and God help anyone who stood in his way. Rain lashed against the bulletproof glass of the black Maybach, blurring the neon lights of downtown Chicago into streaks of blood red and electric blue. Inside the climate-controlled cabin, the air smelled of expensive leather and Viviana De Luca's overpowering perfume. Lorenzo Enzo Moretti, the Don of the Moretti crime syndicate, stared out the window, his jaw set in a line of granite. He tuned out the woman sitting next to him. Viviana was speaking, her voice a high-pitched drone that had been grating on his nerves for the last hour. "I told the florist that white orchids are pedestrian, Enzo," Viviana said, tapping her manicured nails on her smartphone screen. "I want black Baccara roses. They scream power. Daddy agrees with me. He says our union needs to look like a coronation, not a charity ball." Enzo didn't turn his head. "Do whatever you want, Viviana. Just send the bill to Matteo." "You're barely listening," she huffed, shifting in her seat so her silk dress rustled. "This wedding is in 3 weeks. It merges the Moretti and De Luca territories. It's the most important day of your life." "It's a business transaction," Enzo corrected coldly. "Don't romanticize it." The driver, a hulking man named Bruno, eased the car to a stop as the traffic light at the intersection of State and Madison turned red. The wipers slashed back and forth, fighting the torrential downpour. Enzo's eyes drifted lazily to the crosswalk. Pedestrians were huddled under umbrellas, rushing to get out of the storm. It was a sea of grey and black coats, anonymous and dull. Then he saw the yellow. 2 small figures in bright yellow raincoats were skipping over the white stripes of the crosswalk, splashing in puddles. They were holding hands with a woman in a worn beige trench coat. She was struggling with a broken umbrella, her hair plastered to her face. Enzo's heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He knew that walk. He knew the curve of that shoulder. He knew the way she tucked her chin when she was cold. Sophie. It wasn't possible. Sophie Bennett had left Chicago 4 years ago. He had made sure of it. He had broken her heart, shattered her trust, and given her a check for $50,000 to disappear, telling her she wasn't cut out for his world. It was the only way to keep her safe from the war he was fighting back then. But there she was, less than 20 feet away. The wind whipped the umbrella out of her hand. She lunged for it, turning her face toward the line of idling cars. The street lamp illuminated her features. She looked tired, thinner than he remembered, but undeniable. And then the children turned. The boy and the girl, looking no older than 3 or 4, tugged at her coat. The boy shouted something, laughing. Enzo felt as if he had been shot in the chest. The boy had a mop of unruly black curls, the exact same hair Enzo had in his childhood photos. The girl had a sharp, defining brow and eyes that even from this distance Enzo knew were dark, intense, and familiar. They didn't look like Sophie. They looked like him. "Green light, boss," Bruno grunted from the front seat, lifting his foot off the brake. "Stop the car," Enzo whispered. What? Viviana looked up from her phone. Enzo, we're late for dinner with my father. I said, stop the damn car! Enzo roared. Bruno slammed on the brakes, causing the heavy vehicle to lurch. Horns blared behind them. Before the car had even come to a complete halt, Enzo unlatched the door. Enzo, what are you doing? It's pouring! Viviana shrieked, reaching for his arm. He shook her off with a violence that made her recoil. Stay here! Enzo stepped out into the deluge. The icy rain soaked his $3,000 custom suit in seconds, but he didn't feel it. His gaze was locked on the sidewalk. Sophie and the two children had reached the other side and were hurrying toward the entrance of a subway station. Sophie! He shouted, his voice tearing through the noise of the traffic. Thunder rumbled, drowning him out. He didn't care. He vaulted over the hood of a taxi that had stopped too close, ignoring the driver's angry yell. He sprinted across the intersection, his Italian leather shoes splashing through deep puddles. He had to catch her. If those children were his, if she had kept this from him. The rage that flared in his chest was hot and blinding, warring with a sudden, terrifying hope he hadn't realized he possessed. He reached the sidewalk and pushed past a group of tourists. She was descending the stairs to the subway. He saw the yellow raincoats disappearing underground. Sophie. He took the stairs 2 at a time, risking a broken neck on the slippery concrete. He reached the bottom landing, just as she was fumbling with a metro card at the turnstile. She sensed him before she saw him. It was an instinct they had always shared. She froze, her back stiffening. Slowly she turned around. The color drained from her face, leaving her ghost white. The metro card fell from her trembling fingers and clattered onto the dirty floor. Enzo, she breathed, the name a mixture of prayer and curse. The two children looked up at the towering, soaked man breathing heavily before them. The boy stepped in front of his mother, his small fists balling up, his chin jutting out. "Leave my mummy alone," the boy shouted. Enzo stared at the child. It was like looking in a mirror that distorted time. The fierce protectiveness, the stance, the eyes. "Jesus Christ," Enzo whispered, the realization hitting him with the force of a freight train. He looked at Sophie, his eyes burning with betrayal and awe. "They're mine!" It wasn't a question. The subway station hummed with the electric buzz of the approaching train and the distant chatter of commuters. But in that small circle by the turnstiles, the silence was deafening. Sophie Bennett pulled the children closer, her arms wrapping around them like a shield. "Go away, Enzo. You don't belong here." "Don't lie to me." Enzo stepped closer, water dripping from his hair onto his face, making him look even more menacing. He pointed a trembling finger at the boy. "Look at him, Sophie. Look at his face. How old are they?" "They're 3, Sophie lied quickly, her voice cracking. "They aren't yours. I met someone else right after." "Liar!" Enzo's voice echoed off the tiled walls, causing several commuters to stop and stare. He lowered his voice to a dangerous growl. "We were together 4 years ago. You left 4 years ago. The math isn't hard, Sophie, even for a thug like me." He knelt down, ignoring the grime on the floor. He was now eye level with the children. The girl, who had been hiding behind Sophie's leg, peeked out. She was clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit. "What are your names?" Enzo asked, his voice softening unexpectedly. The rage was still there, simmering, but looking at them. It was disarming. "I'm Leo," the boy said bravely, though his lower lip trembled. "And this is Mia. You made my mummy scared." Leo. Lorenzo's grandfather's name was Leonardo. He looked up at Sophie, his eyes searching hers. "Leo." Sophie looked away, tears mingling with the rain on her cheeks. "It's just a name, Enzo. It doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," he said, standing up to his full height. He towered over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "You hid them, You hid my son and my daughter. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I did what you told me to do," Sophie snapped, a sudden flash of anger breaking through her fear. "You told me I was a liability. You told me your world was too dangerous for a waitress. You threw me away like garbage, Enzo. Did you expect me to come crawling back and tell you I was pregnant so you could take them away from me? I would have protected them, like you protected me." Sophie scoffed, bitter laugh. "You broke me, Enzo. I wasn't going to let you break them too." Before Enzo could respond, the sound of heels clicking aggressively on the concrete stairs drew their attention. "Enzo." Viviana De Luca appeared, holding a designer umbrella, flanked by Bruno and another bodyguard. She looked at the scene with disdain, the dirty subway station, the wet floor, and the woman in the cheap trench coat. "Enzo, are you insane?" Viviana hissed, walking up to him. "My father is waiting. We are soaking wet. Who is this?" Viviana's eyes scanned Sophie, dismissing her instantly as a nobody, but then her gaze fell on the twins. Her eyes widened. She looked from Leo to Enzo and back again. The resemblance was undeniable. Viviana's face twisted into a mask of pure venom. "Who are these brats?" "Watch your mouth," Enzo warned, his voice low and lethal. He turned to Bruno. "Take Viviana to her father's estate. Tell Don De Luca I have urgent family business." "I am your family," Viviana shrieked, grabbing his arm. "We are getting married in 3 weeks. You cannot abandon me in a subway station for some gutter trash and her bastards." Enzo grabbed Viviana's wrist. He didn't squeeze hard, but the threat was clear. "I said go. If you say one more word about them, the wedding is off. And if the wedding is off, the alliance is dead. Do you want to explain to your father why you started a war tonight?" Viviana paled. She snatched her hand back, glaring at Sophie with a hatred so pure it chilled the air. "This isn't over," she spat. She spun around and marched back up the stairs, her heels clacking like gunshots. Enzo turned back to Sophie. The train had arrived, the doors opening with a chime. People were flowing out. "Get in the car," Enzo said. "No." Sophie shook her head, backing toward the turnstile. "We're getting on the train. We're going home." "Sophie, look at me." Enzo stepped into her path, blocking the turnstile. Viviana knows now. She isn't just a jealous fiancée. She's a De Luca. She's dangerous. You just became a target. They are targets. I can take care of us," Sophie stammered, but her confidence was wavering. She knew who the De Lucas were. Everyone in Chicago did. "Not against them you can't," Enzo said grimly. "And not against me." He reached out and gently took the broken umbrella from her hand, tossing it into a trash can. Then he scooped Mia up into his arms. The little girl gasped but didn't cry. She stared at him with wide, curious eyes. "Put her down," Sophie cried, grabbing his arm. "I'm taking us home, Sophie," Enzo said, the decision made. "Not to your apartment, to the estate. You want them safe. Then you come with me. Right-o." Leo tried to hit Enzo's leg. "Put her down!" Enzo looked down at the boy. "Leo, I'm going to take you to a place where no one can ever hurt you or your mom again. But you have to trust me. Can you be brave?" Leo looked at his mother. Sophie looked at Enzo, seeing the iron resolve in his eyes. She knew him. She knew that once Lorenzo Moretti decided something, it was as good as done. And she knew he was right about the danger. Viviana's eyes had promised violence. "Defeated?" Sophie nodded. "Fine. But only for tonight." Enzo didn't smile. He adjusted Mia in his arms, feeling the impossible weight of fatherhood settling onto his shoulders for the first time. "Let's go." As they walked out of the subway and into the waiting rain, Enzo signaled for his secondary security car. He wasn't just a mob boss anymore. He was a father, and the streets of Chicago were about to run red if anyone tried to touch what he had just found. The ride to the Moretti estate was suffocatingly silent. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the Maybach's engine and the soft, shallow breathing of the sleeping twins. The adrenaline of the subway confrontation had faded, leaving Sophie Bennett exhausted and trembling in the plush leather seat. She looked across the darkened cabin at Enzo. He was on his phone, typing furiously, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. He looked older than she remembered. There were silver strands in his dark hair now, and a scar cut through his left eyebrow that hadn't been there 4 years ago. He looked harder, like a statue carved from obsidian. "Where are you taking us, really?" Sophie whispered, afraid to wake Leo and Mia, who were curled up against her sides. Enzo didn't look up from his phone. "I told you, the estate, it's in Lake Forest. High walls, armed guards, 24-hour surveillance. It's a fortress." "We don't need a fortress, Enzo. We need a life." "You don't have a life anymore, Sophie," Enzo said, finally locking his phone and meeting her gaze. His eyes were bottomless pits of dark coffee. "Not since Viviana saw their faces. The DeLucas are old school. They don't believe in loose ends. If she thinks these kids threaten her claim to the Moretti throne, she will remove them." Sophie shivered. "You were supposed to marry her." "I was," Enzo admitted, without an ounce of regret. "It was a merger. Her father, Salvatore De Luca, controls the shipping ports. I control the unions and the streets. Together we would have owned the Midwest. And now? Now," Enzo looked at the sleeping form of Leo, his expression unreadable. "The plan has changed." The car turned off the highway and approached a massive wrought-iron gate. Security lights flooded the vehicle. Armed men with assault rifles stepped out of a guardhouse, saw Bruno driving, and immediately saluted, opening the gates. As they wound up the long driveway, the estate came into view. It was a sprawling limestone mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. It was magnificent and cold. "It's too much," Sophie murmured. "They're used to a one-bedroom apartment in Uptown. They share a bed." "Not anymore," Enzo said firmly. When the car stopped, Enzo didn't wait for Bruno. He got out and walked around to Sophie's side. He opened the door and gently unbuckled the sleeping Leo. "I can take him," Sophie protested weakly. "He's heavy, and you look like you're about to collapse." Enzo lifted the boy with surprising tenderness. Leo stirred, his head resting naturally on Enzo's broad shoulder, his small hand clutching the lapel of Enzo's expensive suit. Sophie picked up Mia, clutching the girl's worn stuffed rabbit. They walked into the grand foyer, where a crystal chandelier the size of a small car hung from a vaulted ceiling. An older woman in a crisp black and white uniform was waiting for them. She had a stern face, but kind eyes. "Greta," Enzo said, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "Prepare the East Wing guest suites. We have guests. Indefinitely." Greta's eyes widened slightly as she took in the wet, disheveled woman and the sleeping children, but she was a professional. She nodded. "Of course, sir. Shall I call for the doctor?" "No, just food. Something warm. And get some clothes. Anything. Just get them out of these wet rags." "Enzo," Sophie said, her voice echoing too loudly. "I don't want the East Wing. I want to stay with them." "The suite has 2 bedrooms connected by a parlor," Enzo explained, turning to walk up the grand staircase. "You will stay with them. I'll be down the hall." He carried Leo up the stairs, Sophie trailing behind him like a refugee in a palace. When they reached the bedroom, Enzo laid Leo down on a bed that cost more than Sophie made in a year. He pulled the silk duvet over the boy's shoulders. For a long moment, the ruthless Mafia Don just stood there, staring at the child. He reached out a hand, hovering over Leo's curls but didn't touch him. "He has your nose," Sophie whispered from the doorway. Enzo stiffened. "Why didn't you tell me, Sophie? That day I gave you the check. Were you pregnant then?" "I found out 2 days later," she said, her voice thick with old pain. "I called you 3 times. Bruno answered. He said you were busy. He said you told him never to put me through." Enzo closed his eyes, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "I was in the hospital. I had taken 2 bullets to the chest. I didn't want you to know I was dying. I wanted you to hate me so you'd stay away." Sophie's breath hitched. She hadn't known. You were shot?" "It doesn't matter now." Enzo turned, his face hardening again. "You're here. You're safe. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, everything changes." He walked past her, smelling of rain and expensive cologne, leaving her alone in a room that felt like a golden cage. Morning light streamed through the heavy velvet curtains, waking Sophie. For a second, she panicked, not recognizing the room, until she saw Mia and Leo jumping on the massive bed, giggling. "Mummy, look! The TV comes out of the scary box!" Leo shouted, pointing a remote at a cabinet where a flat screen was rising. Sophie sat up, her head throbbing. Before she could scold them, there was a knock at the door. Greta entered, pushing a cart laden with silver platters. "Good morning, Miss Bennet," Greta said politely. "Mr. Moretti requested you join him in the library after breakfast. He has company." Sophie's stomach churned. She dressed the twins in oversized t-shirts Greta had found, likely belonging to Enzo when he was a child, kept in storage, and put on a clean robe. She left the kids with Greta, who seemed surprisingly charmed by Maya's chatter, and went downstairs. The library was a room of dark mahogany and leather. Enzo was sitting behind a massive desk. Standing across from him were 3 men in suits. Sophie recognized one of them from the news, Marco Vane, Enzo's consigliere and lawyer. The atmosphere was thick with tension. "She's here," Enzo said, standing up as Sophie entered. The 3 men turned, their eyes raked over her judgmentally. "This is the girl?" Marco asked, adjusting his glasses. "Enzo, this is messy. Salvatore De Luca has been calling all morning. He says you disrespected Viviana in public. He's threatening to pull the port access." "Let him," Enzo said calmly. "You can't just let him," Marco argued, slamming a folder on the desk. "The commission won't back you if you start a war over an ex-girlfriend. Unless—" "Unless what?" Sophie asked, stepping further into the room. Enzo looked at her. "Unless the children are undeniable heirs. By blood." He gestured to a man in a white coat, standing in the corner. "A doctor. We need a DNA test, Sophie. Right now. Not for me. I know who they are. But for the family. If they are Moretti's, they are protected by the blood code. No one can touch them without declaring war on the entire organization." Sophie crossed her arms. "And if I refuse, I don't want them part of your organization." "Then they are just civilians caught in the crossfire," Enzo said brutally. "And civilians die, Sophie. Heirs survive." It was a manipulation, but it was also the truth. Sophie nodded slowly. "Fine. Do it." The doctor moved quickly, swabbing Sophie, Enzo, and then going upstairs to swab the twins. As the doctor left, a sudden commotion erupted at the front door. The heavy oak doors were thrown open, banging against the walls. "I want to see him! Get your hands off me!" Viviana De Luca stormed into the hallway, followed by 2 of her own bodyguards. Enzo's security team had their guns drawn, but they looked hesitant to shoot the daughter of a rival Don. Enzo walked out of the library, Sophie staying in the shadow of the doorway. "Viviana," Enzo said, his voice dangerously low. You weren't invited." Viviana looked immaculate in a white pantsuit, but her eyes were manic. "You embarrassed me, Enzo. My father is furious. He wants to know why you chose a waitress over the De Luca Empire." "I chose my children," Enzo said calmly. "Children?" Viviana laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. "You mean those bastards? How do you know they're yours? She probably slept with every busboy in Chicago after you dumped her." "Careful," Enzo warned, taking a step forward. "I'm here to give you a chance, Enzo," Viviana sneered, reaching into her purse. The guards tensed, fingers on triggers. She pulled out a small velvet box. The engagement ring. She threw it at his chest. It bounced off his lapel and clattered onto the marble floor. "Daddy says you have 24 hours to kick them out and issue a public apology to me," Viviana hissed. "If you don't, the ports close, your shipments rot, and we start hunting." Suddenly, a small voice piped up from the top of the stairs. "Why is the witch lady screaming?" Everyone looked up. Leo was standing at the railing, holding a toy car. Viviana's face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. She looked at the boy, the living proof of Enzo's betrayal. "You little rat," she spat. "Bruno," Enzo said, his voice sounding like cracking ice. "Escort Miss De Luca out. If she speaks again, remove her tongue." Viviana's eyes widened. She saw the look in Enzo's eyes. It wasn't business anymore. It was primal. She signaled her guards and they backed away. "You've made a mistake, Lorenzo," she whispered as she reached the door. "A fatal one." As the door slammed shut, silence returned to the hallway. Enzo looked up at Leo, who was watching him with wide, intelligent eyes. "Is she the bad guy?" Leo asked. Enzo walked up the stairs, ignoring his terrified advisors below. He crouched down in front of his son. "Yes, Leo, she is." "Are you the good guy?" Leo asked. Enzo hesitated. He looked at his hands, stained with the invisible blood of 100 men. Then he looked at Sophie, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and hope. "I'm the guy who keeps the bad guys away," Enzo said softly. "Come on. Let's go see your sister." Downstairs, Marco sighed and pulled out his phone. "Prepare the soldiers," he told the person on the other end, "and double the guard on the perimeter. The peace treaty is dead. We're at war." But the war came faster than they expected. Later that afternoon, a courier van marked with a generic delivery logo pulled up to the service gate. The guard approached to check the manifest. There was no delivery. A massive explosion rocked the estate, shattering the windows of the West Wing and setting off car alarms for a mile. In the nursery, Enzo threw himself over Sophie and the twins as glass rained down around them. The floor shook violently. As the dust settled, the wail of sirens began to rise in the distance. Enzo stood up, brushing glass from his hair, his eyes burning with a demonic fury. They had tried to bomb his house, with his children inside. He pulled Sophie up, checking the kids. They were crying but unharmed. "Greta!" Enzo roared, his voice shaking the walls. "Take them to the panic room in the basement! Now!" He turned to the window, looking out at the plume of black smoke rising from his front gate. "They want a war?" Enzo growled, grabbing a handgun from a hidden safe in the wall. "I'll give them a massacre." The panic room was a cold, sterile box of reinforced steel buried 20 feet beneath the mansion's foundation. The air was recycled and tasted of copper. Sophie sat on a cot, pulling Leo and Mia into her lap, trying to muffle the sounds vibrating through the ceiling. Even through feet of concrete, they could feel the thud of heavy machinery and the staccato pop of automatic gunfire. "Is it thunder?" Mia whispered, burying her face in Sophie's chest. "Yes, baby," Sophie lied, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Just a storm." Above ground, the Moretti estate had turned into a war zone. The delivery van explosion had blown the main gates off their hinges, allowing 2 black SUVs to roar onto the lawn. Men in tactical gear poured out, moving with military precision. They weren't street thugs. They were mercenaries. Enzo moved through the hallways of his home like a phantom. He had shed his suit jacket, his white dress shirt rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He held a custom Sig Sauer P226 in his hand, a weapon he hadn't fired in anger in years. "Bruno!" Enzo shouted into his earpiece. "Status! They breached the West Wing, boss!" Bruno's voice was strained, accompanied by the roar of a shotgun. "They're heading for the basement access. They know where the panic room is." Enzo's blood ran cold. The location of the panic room was a secret known only to his inner circle. A rat. There was a rat in his house. "Hold them at the stairwell," Enzo ordered, his voice devoid of humanity. "I'm flanking them." Enzo sprinted down the service corridor, bypassing the main staircase. He kicked open the door to the kitchen just as 2 mercenaries were setting up a breach charge on the basement door. They turned, raising their rifles, but Enzo was faster. 2 shots rang out. 2 bodies hit the floor. Enzo didn't stop. He stepped over the bodies, checking the hallway. It was clear. He moved to the basement door and tapped the keypad code. The heavy steel door hissed open. He ran down the stairs, finding the panic room sealed tight. "Sophie, open the door, it's me!" he shouted, pounding the steel. The locks disengaged with a heavy clank. The door swung open. Sophie stood there, holding a heavy flashlight like a club, her eyes wide with terror. "Enzo!" She dropped the flashlight and rushed to him, checking him for blood. "Are you okay?" The noise stopped. "We held them off," Enzo said breathlessly, holstering his gun. He looked at the twins, who were huddled on the cot. "But we can't stay here. The house is compromised. They know the layout." "How?" Sophie asked, tears welling up. "How do they know?" "I don't know yet," Enzo growled. "But I'm going to find out. We need to move. The helicopter is on the roof." "Helicopter?" Leo's eyes went wide. "Yeah, buddy. A big loud bird." Enzo forced a smile for the boy, though his eyes remained deadly serious. "Come on. Up the service elevator. Now." They moved quickly. The estate was a ruin of shattered glass and bullet-ridden drywall. Bodies of the attackers and 3 of Enzo's own guards littered the floor. Sophie covered the children's eyes, guiding them toward the roof access. As they emerged onto the helipad, the wind from the rotors of the waiting Bell 429 whipped Sophie's hair across her face. The pilot, a man Enzo trusted with his life, gave a thumbs up. Enzo helped Sophie and the kids into the back. He buckled them in. "Where are you going?" Sophie grabbed his hand as he started to back away. "I have to finish this, Sophie," Enzo yelled over the roar of the rotors. "If I leave now, they win. They'll hunt us down in the sky. I have to stay and hold the ground." "No!" Sophie screamed. "You're their father. You just found them. Don't you dare die on me again." Enzo froze. He looked at Leo and Mia, their faces pressed against the glass. Then he looked at Sophie. The fear of losing him again was more potent in her eyes than the fear of the gunman. "I'll be right behind you," Enzo promised. "Go to the safe house in Wisconsin. Bruno is piloting. He'll get you there." He slammed the door shut and slapped the fuselage. The helicopter lifted off, banking sharply away from the smoke rising from the estate. Enzo watched them disappear into the grey clouds. Then he turned back to the roof access door, reloaded his weapon, and walked back into the burning building. It was time to find the rat. The sun was setting by the time the shooting stopped completely. The police had been bought off. Marco Vane had made the necessary calls to the superintendent, framing the event as a gas leak explosion and a private security training accident. The flashing lights at the gate were just for show to keep the neighbors away. Inside the ruined library, Enzo sat on the edge of his desk. His shirt was ruined, stained with dust and blood, none of it his own. 3 men were kneeling on the floor in front of him, zip-tied and bleeding. They were the surviving mercenaries. Marco Vane stood by the window, looking pale. "Enzo, the De Lucas have denied involvement. They say this was a rogue element." "Bullshit," Enzo spat. He walked over to the man in the middle, the leader of the strike team. He was a thick-necked Russian with a broken nose. "Who paid you?" Enzo asked quietly. The Russian spat a glob of blood onto Enzo's shoe. "Go to hell." Enzo didn't blink. He nodded to his head of security, a man named Dante. Dante stepped forward and pressed a boot onto the Russian's shattered knee. The man screamed. "I don't have time for games," Enzo said, his voice level. "My children were in this house. You broke the one rule that matters. Who paid? You?" "The woman," the Russian gasped, sweating profusely. "The blonde woman. She gave us the blueprints. She gave us the codes." Enzo stiffened. "Viviana. She wanted the kids," the Russian wheezed. "She said, 'Bring her the eyes. Proof of death.'" A silence so heavy it felt like gravity filled the room. Marco looked at the floor. Dante looked away. "The blueprints," Enzo said, his mind racing. "How did she get the panic room codes? I change them every week. Only 3 people have them. Me, Dante." And Enzo's eyes slowly turned toward the doorway, where Greta, the housekeeper, was standing with a tray of water for the guards. Greta froze. The tray rattled in her hands. "Greta," Enzo said softly. The older woman's face crumbled. She dropped the tray, the glass shattering on the floor. "She threatened my son, Enzo. She said she'd kill my Thomas if I didn't give her the codes." Enzo stared at the woman who had made his bed and cooked his meals for 10 years. The woman who had smiled at Leo and Mia just hours ago. "You sold my children," Enzo whispered, "for your son." "I had no choice," Greta sobbed, falling to her knees. "Please, sir. She's a monster." Enzo walked over to her. He looked down at her weeping form. In the old days before yesterday, he would have put a bullet in her head without a second thought. That was the punishment for betrayal. But he remembered Sophie's face. He remembered the way Leo had looked at him. "Are you the good guy?" "Get her out of here," Enzo said to Dante, turning his back. "Put her on a plane to nowhere. If I ever see her face in Chicago again, kill her." "Thank you, sir. Thank you," Greta wept as Dante dragged her away. Enzo turned to Marco. "Get the car, the armored SUV, and call Salvatore De Luca." "You want to negotiate?" Marco asked, surprised. "No." Enzo picked up his jacket, wincing as he put it on. "I want to surrender." Marco dropped his phone. "What?" "Set up a meeting. Tonight. Neutral ground. The abandoned warehouse on the docks. Tell him I'm done. I'm handing over the territory. I just want safe passage for me and the girl." "Enzo, you can't be serious," Marco stammered. "The Moretti legacy. Your father." "Do it!" Enzo roared. Marco scrambled to make the call. Enzo walked to the window, looking out at the charred remains of his gate. He wasn't surrendering. He was setting the stage. Viviana wanted a war. He would give her one. But first, he had to make them lower their shields. He pulled out his phone and dialed the satellite number for the helicopter. "Bruno," Enzo said when the line connected. "We're 10 minutes out from the safe house, boss. Everyone is okay," Bruno reported. "Put Sophie on." A moment later, Sophie's voice came through, tinny and anxious. "Enzo, are you alive?" "I'm fine," Enzo said, his voice softening. "Listen to me, Sophie. I need you to do something very difficult. I need you to trust me one last time." "What are you doing?" "I'm ending it. Tonight. But I need you to stay at the safe house. Do not leave. No matter what you hear on the news. no matter who calls you. Do you understand? Enzo, you're scaring me. What are you going to do? I'm going to go see the DeLucas, Enzo said, checking the magazine of his pistol. I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve. He hung up before she could argue. 2 hours later, Enzo stood alone in the center of a damp, dimly lit warehouse by the Chicago River. The smell of rust and stagnant water hung in the air. Headlights cut through the darkness. 3 limousines rolled in, followed by a convoy of trucks. The DeLucas had arrived. Salvatore DeLuca, an obese man with a cane and a breathing problem, stepped out of the center limo. Viviana stepped out next to him, wearing a red trench coat, looking triumphant. They were surrounded by at least 30 armed men. Enzo was alone. "Look at this," Salvatore wheezed, limping forward. The great Lorenzo Moretti, alone, defeated. "I came to make a deal," Enzo said, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. "No deals," Viviana smirked, stepping forward. "You broke my heart, Enzo. Now I break your life. Where are the bastards?" "Gone," Enzo lied. "Halfway to Europe." "We'll find them," Viviana shrugged. "But first we take the city. Sign the papers, Enzo. Sign over the unions, the ports, the casinos, everything." Marco stepped out of the shadows of the limo, holding a briefcase. He walked over to Enzo, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry, Enzo," Marco whispered as he opened the briefcase on a rusty barrel. "They made me an offer I couldn't refuse." Enzo looked at his lawyer, then at the DeLucas. He was surrounded. Betrayed by his housekeeper, abandoned by his lawyer, outnumbered 30-1. Salvatore laughed, a wet, rasping sound. "Sign it, boy, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to watch me marry my daughter to your rival in New York." Enzo picked up the pen. He looked at Viviana. "You really think you've won?" "I know I have." Viviana stepped closer, her eyes gleaming. "You're nothing without the family, Enzo. You're just a man." Enzo smiled. It was a terrifying, blood-chilling smile. "That's the thing, Viviana," Enzo said, dropping the pen. "I'm not just a man. I'm a distraction." He pressed a button on his watch. The lights in the warehouse suddenly died, plunging them into pitch blackness. From the rafters above, red laser dots appeared. Dozens of them, dancing on the chests of the DeLuca soldiers. "What is this?" Salvatore screamed. "I didn't come alone," Enzo's voice echoed in the dark. "I brought the ghosts you forgot about." The darkness in the warehouse was absolute, save for the terrifying dance of red laser sights painting the chests of the DeLuca soldiers. The silence that followed Enzo's declaration was broken only by the panicked breathing of Salvatore DeLuca. "You're bluffing!" Viviana shrieked into the blackness, her voice cracking. "You have no one left. We killed your men." "You killed my employees." Enzo's voice drifted from a different location than where he had been standing, echoing off the corrugated metal walls. "You didn't kill my brothers." Suddenly, high-powered floodlights snapped on from the catwalks above, blinding the DeLuca faction. Lining the railings were 20 men clad in black tactical gear, rifles trained on the floor. But these weren't just hired guns. Among them stood Bruno, his arm bandaged but his aim steady, and next to him, to everyone's shock, was the Russian mercenary leader who had supposedly been interrogated earlier. "You bought him?" Salvatore gasped, realizing the depth of the deception. "Everyone has a price, Salvatore." Enzo stepped back into the circle of light, holding a detonator. "You paid him to kill me. I paid him double to miss. And I paid him triple to tell you exactly what you wanted to hear so you'd feel safe enough to come out of your hole." Marco Vane, the lawyer who had just betrayed Enzo, calmly closed the briefcase on the barrel. He picked up the pen Enzo had dropped and placed it in his pocket. He walked over to stand beside Enzo, his demeanor shifting from cowering victim to cold consigliere in a heartbeat. The contracts in that briefcase aren't for the surrender of the Moretti territory, Marco said smoothly, adjusting his glasses. They are confessions, detailed records of your illegal arms deals, your port smuggling, and the order to bomb a residence containing minors. We've already sent copies to the FBI, the IRS, and the Commission. You rat! Viviana screamed. She raised a small pistol she had concealed in her coat and fired blindly at Enzo. The shot went wide, sparking against a steel pillar. Before she could fire again, a single shot rang out from the catwalk. The pistol flew from Viviana's hand as a bullet shattered the ground inches from her feet. She screamed and clutched her wrist, though she wasn't hit. "The next one doesn't miss," Bruno called down, his voice grim. Enzo walked slowly toward Viviana. The De Luca soldiers, realizing they were outflanked and outgunned, began to lower their weapons. They were mercenaries, not martyrs. They saw the laser dots on their chests. They knew the check wasn't worth dying for. "Drop them," Enzo commanded. One by one, the rifles clattered to the concrete floor. Enzo stopped in front of Viviana. She was trembling, cradling her hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and undiluted rage. "You ruined everything," she hissed. "I was going to be a queen." "You were never a queen, Viviana," Enzo said, his voice void of emotion. "You were just a spoiled child playing with matches, and now you've burned your house down." He turned to Salvatore. The old Don was clutching his chest, his face grey. "The police are 5 minutes away," Enzo said, checking his watch. "The files Marco sent will put you away for the rest of your life. The Commission has already stripped you of your rank for breaking the code and targeting children. You are done, Salvatore." "Enzo!" Salvatore wheezed, falling to his knees. "Mercy, for the sake of our fathers." "My father never bombed a nursery," Enzo replied coldly. He turned his back on them. "Let the police have them. I have somewhere to be." As Enzo walked toward the exit, sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder. Viviana screamed his name, a sound of pure desperation, but he didn't look back. He walked out into the cool night air, leaving the toxicity of his past to rot in that warehouse. 3 days later, the safe house in Wisconsin was a cabin by a frozen lake, surrounded by pine trees and silence. It was a world away from the grime and blood of Chicago. Sophie sat on the wooden porch, wrapped in a thick blanket, watching Leo and Mia build a snowman in the yard. They were laughing, their cheeks flushed pink with cold. They seemed to have already forgotten the explosions and the fear. Children were resilient like that. She, however, was still jumping at shadows. She heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Her heart leaped into her throat. She stood up, ready to run inside and bolt the door. A black SUV pulled into the driveway. It wasn't an armored war machine this time. It was a family car. The door opened, and Enzo stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore dark jeans and a thick wool sweater. He looked tired, the dark circles under his eyes prominent, but he also looked lighter. "Daddy!" Leo shouted. The word hung in the frozen air. Enzo froze. It was the first time the boy had called him that. Leo and Mia abandoned their snowman and ran toward him. Enzo dropped his bag in the snow and fell to his knees, opening his arms. They collided with him, nearly knocking him over. He buried his face in their necks, breathing in the scent of cold air and innocence. Sophie walked slowly down the steps. She stopped a few feet away. Enzo looked up at her over the heads of the children. He stood up, still holding Mia's hand. "Is it over?" Sophie asked quietly. "It's over," Enzo nodded. "Salvatore and Viviana are in federal custody. They won't be getting out. The territory, I restructured it. Marco is handling the day-to-day legal operations. I'm stepping back." "Stepping back?" Sophie raised an eyebrow. "You're the Don, Enzo. You don't just step back." "I'm still the boss," Enzo said, stepping closer to her. "But I'm not going to be on the front lines anymore. I have a new job." He reached into his pocket. For a second, Sophie thought he was reaching for a weapon, old habits dying hard. But he pulled out a small, velvet box, not the one Viviana had thrown at him. A new one. He opened it. Inside was a simple, elegant diamond ring, devoid of the gaudy pretension of the mob world. "I can't undo the last 4 years," Enzo said, his voice raspy with emotion. "I can't undo the pain I caused you, but I can promise you that for the rest of my life, my only mission is to make sure you and these kids never feel fear again. I want to build a new empire, Sophie, one that actually matters." He didn't kneel. The snow was too deep, and the moment was too raw for theatrics. He just looked at her with his soul bare. "Marry me, Sophie. Let me be the father they deserve. Let me be the man you deserve." Sophie looked at the ring, then at the twins who were watching with wide eyes, and finally at Enzo. She saw the killer, yes, but she also saw the protector, the man who had walked into fire for them. Tears pricked her eyes. She stepped forward and took his hand. "You have a lot of work to do, Lorenzo Moretti," she whispered. "I'm not afraid of work," he smiled, slipping the ring onto her finger. He pulled her in for a kiss that tasted of winter and promise. As their lips met, Leo threw a snowball at Enzo's leg. "Hey!" Enzo laughed, breaking the kiss. He scooped up a handful of snow. "Oh, you want a war? I'll give you a war." Sophie watched as the most feared man in Chicago chased his children around the snowy yard, his laughter echoing through the trees. The ghosts were gone. The rain had stopped, and for the first time in his life, Lorenzo Moretti was truly home. This story reminds us that even in the darkest worlds, the bond of blood and the power of love can shatter the strongest chains. Enzo Moretti was a man who thought power came from fear, but he learned that true power comes from what you are willing to protect. From the heart-stopping moment at the Crosswalk to the explosive showdown at the warehouse, Enzo and Sophie's journey proves that second chances are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. If you enjoyed this dramatic mafia romance and want to see more stories where true love conquers all, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with a friend who loves a good plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We have plenty more heart-pounding stories coming your way every week. Thanks for listening.